Hello, welcome to another tutorial video. So in light of the request, I've actually made a comparison list of the conflict poems, which ones could be compared with other ones. Now before I look at this at all, and I did just go over all the poems, it's probably the first time I've looked at them all like that in one go. I reckon that you could compare anything with anything and still do very well, still get an A. There's only two that don't fit in very well with everything else, and that's flag and hawk roosting. I know flag isn't going to be on there. I can't remember where the hawk roosting will be, but flag definitely isn't going to be on the higher paper as the actual named question. There's two others, but forgive me, they escape me right now. So we'll just look at all of them and then see where we get to. So every single poem is mentioned in here, and I've got the general theme or idea that might have been mentioned or actually comes across very strong, and then the link or the way it's actually linked, and then we've got an alternative suggestion just so we kind of catch everything in. Now this is just one way of looking at it. You could make 60 of these lists and they'd all still be deadly accurate. So don't, if if the first thing you see that I've put here isn't the first thing that came to you, then don't worry about it. Whatever works for you. You've got your smile points, you've got your teacher's notes, you may have your revision guide, whatever it gives you an instruction and you feel comfortable with, that's what you've got to do. You've got to write about what you feel confident about. But it was asked for, so these are the ones I think just kind of sync in with each other quite nicely. So we start with At the Border, and that's looking at people's lives. And I thought it was really kind of good to compare it to Out of the Blue because, they're sustained events, and there's the positive idea that these people are actually going to get out of the situation, and there's negative connotation that he's not going to get out of it. But at the same time, these people are quite deluded about the situation they're in, thinking that everything's going to be better, whereas this person is very accepting and realistic about his situation. So you can actually mix and match and play around with that. And Poppies is an interesting addition to this because it's also looking at people's lives, looking at the life of the mother and how she deals with it. And obviously the perspectives are different and the language and the tone are very different. So there's a lot to compare and contrast. Moving on then to Yellow Palm. Well, Yellow Palm really focuses on an anti-war message. That's probably the strongest thing we get throughout that, and we get that from Mamet's Wood as well, and both of them have really negative connotations. And also they've got the visitor's experience in both. So again, there's a lot of things to actually compare, and there's a lot of imagery in both as well. So there's a lot to actually analyze and compare and link. And we've got another comparison you can add to that is the Come On, Come Back, where we've got this other person's experience. It's being commented on again, but this one's more absurd, and this one actually takes it to an extent that's more similar to Mamet's Wood in that there's death at the end of it, clearly mentioned. Whereas this one, obviously it's alluded to, but we don't actually see the dead, and we know there's death, but it's not directly in front of us. So yeah, and they both obviously have the negative connotations and they're anti-war. We've got the Bayonet Charge next, and that's focusing on a soldier's experience primarily, and that can obviously straight away be compared to the Charge of the Light Brigade, and both of the negative actions in what they were actually doing, even though the outcome for one is slightly more positive than the other. Again, that's a comparison point, and we can add that to Mamet's Wood if we were looking at the soldier's experience and imagined it after they die as well. It gives us a very interesting other angle. So looking at the Charge of the Light Brigade, we can look at patriotism, etc., and flag was the one that actually came forward. And the reason I picked that one because you've got the following of orders and then the ambiguity of ideas, and I thought they contrasted. If you look through the video, I said every single one of those was very ambiguous, and the reason I think that these actually will compare is because they're both focusing on the patriotism, although one is doing it very ambiguously, making you wonder what it could mean, whereas the other one was unquestioning. So you've got that similarity and contrast straight away to actually delve into. Remember, you're only going to talk about 2, maybe 3, 4 points in the whole thing in terms of your main ideas or your feelings, themes, attitudes that you're actually going to discuss, and then you're going to really flesh it out with analysis of all the things that support and bring you to that. And if you haven't already watched it, please have a look at the AA Star exemplar material that's already up. Moving on then to The Falling Leaves, well, that's really focusing on death, as is Poppies, and the tone of those two is very similar. They're both the writers' kind of backgrounds in that are similar, and they've got like the look from the outside, and that can be excuse me, compared with to the Charge of the Light Brigade, because that's also about death, but it's in a much more heroic sense than the soft consideration of death that we find in these two poems. Belfast Confetti, that, well, again, that's one of the harder ones to actually link to anything else, but we look at the way people are treated, so that allows us to compare at the border 1979, and we've got this immediate reaction to how they're treated by police, you know, being held up against the wall and asked questions, and these ones is very slow, but again, it's still a degradation in both. They're both being degraded, but the pacing is very different. And I compare that also to Right Word, because even though the poet's only talking about the person that turns out to be a child outside, the main emphasis that we're getting is that she's still judging that person, therefore she's still treating them differently, and she's still coming to erroneous conclusions about them. Moving on to Come On Back, we can look at the absurdity of war, and we can compare that to futility because of the idea of the sun recharging here, and there's the whole poem in Come On Back that really helps us focus on the absurdity of war and how. But the tone is very different in both. One's more satirical, and one's more just very somber. And we can also add the right word to that connection, because the absurdity of what's going on there is that she thinks through all these ideas before she actually knows the truth, and obviously the first one couldn't have been further from the truth when we know the end result. Moving on then to Flag. For Flag is very ambiguous, has very philosophical ideas, thinking about the nature of things, and is a flag this, or is a flag that, or is a flag this, or is a flag that, and that allows us to think about the right word as well, thinking of others and how they are and how we judge them, etc., and the power of words. So there we're looking at the power of words and how they're linked, and here we're looking at the power again of something, but something different. We're looking at the power of the flag itself and what it represents, and with that, any ornament or any object, artifact should I say. We move on then to the last one, futility. So futility here is really focusing on death and to some extent absurdity, and we can link that to the hawk roosting, because the thoughts on power there are very absurd as well, and he brings death wherever he goes, and we can link that later on to Come On, Come Back, which again deals with the absurdity and death. So it's very fitting in that trilogy there. So all these things that I've picked out, like I said before, they're not the only ways of doing it, but you asked, what some people asked for, a video on it, so I was happy to oblige, and yeah, I hope that's useful, and all the best of luck with the exam.